Hey, g'day everybody, it's Matt here from Matt Carve. So we're moving into the final part of this How to Carve a Wood Spirit, where I look at details like the eyes and maybe the details of the eyebrows, those kind of things. I'm going to put in that pupil in the eye as well. I'm going to firstly shape this top part of this face, the skull cap, like the one on the left there, quite like that. You can put hair in if you want, but I just quite like these skull caps because I like using that wood dye, and it kind of frames the face as well, which looks really cool. And I'm not going to spend too much time on showing you the skull cap. I tended to just use the bandsaw to round it off and a big disc sander to sort of round it off like that on the top. And I will show you though how we put in sort of like those parts around there and sort of fine up the details, those kind of things. And when I'm sort of like trying to decide how wide my carving needs to be, sometimes I'll use my thumbs like this and sort of just envision what it kind of looks like without that kind of extra wood on the sides, which I quite like. I think I'll maybe make it a little bit more narrow down there.
Okay, so that skull cap's looking really, really good now. And we're gonna remember, like, we wanna put in this sort of like ledge here. So what that kind of means is going back into the skin a little bit. It's kind of okay there, but up here we're gonna be going here and going under it, like that. And so we've got to reform kind of the skin of the person. So the skull cap looks like that.
I am using the Sandpaper Burr there to take the skin back a little bit, but as you can see it's sort of like forming a trough which doesn't really look natural, so what we've got to do is we've got to sort of like smooth out that area as it goes under. And I tried to do it with the Sandpaper Burr. You can sort of see me on the side there just sort of like trying to flatten it out so it looks like just the forehead going under the skull cap. And I'm using the T-burr there. I'm not quite sure what to call it, a T-burr. But anyway, that's quite good for flattening out that forehead. Just zoom in there so you can sort of see what I'm doing. And you need to go very, very lightly with this because sort of like the edges of it will sort of dig in. And what you can do is when you're going along with it is just sort of like have the leading edge, the front edge as you're going along, just angled up just slightly so it doesn't dig into the wood.
Okay, so you could sort of see what I was doing there. I tried to kind of show you. When it's just like skimming stones. When you skim a stone across a river or something, you want that leading edge just to be angled up a slightly little bit so it doesn't dig into the water. So what I mean by that is, say this is your skimming stone and it's going across the water. You need that little bit at the front edge to be just off the water. Sort of that's a little bit exaggerated, but it's going along like that. If it's going along like this, it's going to dig in. So essentially that's what we're going to do with this burr. When we're flattening out that forehead, try not to sort of like, if we're moving this way, just hold it slightly up. I'm trying to get a really good angle here. Just hold it slightly up at that leading edge, and as we're moving along, that leading edge isn't digging in, and going really lightly because because of the shape of this burr, it's going to dig in and kind of leave circles. So the lighter we go, the less likely that's going to happen. It's better to make a lot of passes as opposed to one pass trying to go in really hard.
And I did a little bit of shaping with that disc shaper that fits a Dremel. I'll leave a link for that in the description. That's quite good. That's like a 60 grit that I'm using there, I think. Well, it's pretty good. So it's sort of like shaping it and also like smoothing out as well.
Okay, so we have been working on the skull cap, but I just wanted to point out sort of like these small kind of subtle changes in the carving makes quite a bit of difference. So I've been working on this side, but not this side. So I've kind of made this a little bit skinnier. So I've taken this down further like this, whereas this one's going like that. So I'll bring that one down as well and match it up with that one. And also I'd like to point out, you see how this head's going around like this? what I've done here is I've made a little bit flat, and it's really hard to decipher, but that's actually like going in a little bit there. And so it just looks a little bit more dynamic as opposed to sort of like an oval like that.
And as you can see, I'm using that T-burr for the straight line of the skull cap, just to sort of like fine it up, and they're really, really good for that. And so you don't want to go too deep here. This is sort of like the depth of the actual cap, because you don't want to leave a line in the face when you flatten that off. And I just used the burr that was on there to get rid of the excess wood, and then I sort of like flattened the face out with that burr as well.
Into the details now. So two burrs that I quite like is this one from Master Carver and this one from Dremel. They're both diamond burrs. It says on Dremel that this is 2mm, but it's definitely not 2mm. It's a little bit smaller. What's nice about it is it's really, really small, and it takes nice little grooves out. So you can put sort of like grooves under the eye bags and all of that. We'll do that now. So I sort of tend to go back after I've done the carving, and then I will just sort of put in areas where I kind of think this is kind of like the general kind of shape. You might want to sort of like look at an eye and see where details that you want to put in is. And also like the pupils, I haven't put that in yet. That's still just the pencil marks. Okay. So I'll turn the speed down a little bit, just give me a little bit more control. And I'll just sort of like touch up areas. I want to try and get this sorted out. Let's concentrate on the eyes a little bit. Maybe sort of like defining areas is a good way of putting it. So I kind of like start putting in like creases like that, and just smoothing out areas as well. What a good way of doing a crease is actually sometimes the crease is not sort of like the hollow, but sort of like the mound that goes into the crease, if you get what I mean. It's quite hard to explain. Just sort of defining that area a little bit more.
You can sort of see me going up and down over a line that I've just put in. It's sort of just to smooth out the harshness of it, I guess you would say. So now we're going to put in that bottom bag, and I like to sort of like curve them up, sort of like so they come under the eyeball and sort of like move sort of like not too far out from the eyeball at the top. Sort of, you can see I sort of like rounding up there, so they kind of all kind of come to the corner of the eyeball. There we go. I'm sort of like just smoothing that bottom one off again, and it's really, really light touches. I'm just sort of like, this is real time. This is how I carve. It's just really slow. And what I do with wrinkles is I'll put them in, and if I like them, I'll keep them and might exaggerate them a little bit more, but not too much. I don't like to have really sort of pronounced aspects on the carving. Like I don't tend to like to put in sort of defined hairs or anything like that. Sort of, I like to leave it up to the imagination of the viewer to fill in the spots, fill in the details, I should say. And I can use this sort of like pointy burr for sort of like really kind of defined areas. You'll be very careful because this one will dig in a little bit, so I tend to just use it a little bit at the end. And you can use the side of it to sort of smooth out parts as well. So you got to get like a more defined kind of wrinkle, more of a line. Just see if it looks right, and if it doesn't, just sort of like take it out. Because you haven't gone too deep, it doesn't really matter.
I think too, you've got to realize like you're going to be looking at this from a distance mainly. You're not going to be looking close up at it. So that eye is looking pretty cool. And I kind of think, yeah, the eyebrows are kind of working. I kind of don't like to put in really heaps of lines, but I like to keep it a little bit different from sort of like these lines.
And you can use those inverted cone burrs to put in little lines too if you want. You know, there's not just those two burrs that I showed you before that puts in lines. There's heaps of them, and they all have their benefits. I think I went a bit too deep there, but we'll just carve that out a little bit. When it comes to wrinkles, what I will do is I'll put in a line like this, and I might use sort of like an inverted cone burr, something that makes kind of like a nice line, and then I will change to another diamond bit that's a little bit rounder and sort of like smooth out those lines. So with wrinkles, you kind of get that kind of line, but it's sort of like gradually goes into the skin, so it's not like a sharp line, it's sort of just smoothly going in. You get what I mean. It kind of looks a little bit more natural there after I've been over it. And you can actually put wrinkles in with that burr with a little tip of it as well. Doing it a little bit there. Sorry about the focus there, it's really tough when it gets this close. And sometimes sort of like I'll use that burr and I'll just sort of like go over, say, the eyebrows, just take off sort of like sharp bits and all of that. It looks a little bit more natural if it's I don't know, if it's not so many just defined lines, but sort of like little bits of non-defined lines and a few defined lines. Okay, so we're going to carve the pupil now, and I'm using that Dremel diamond bit. It's just a sphere at the end. And so I just tend to go in and I will sort of, it's really hard because the eye is quite small. Well, the eye pupil is quite small. So I tend to go in and go really, really slowly and just go on the outside and just keep a steady hand, go slow, go lightly, go over things twice. It's better to do that than just sort of like plunge it in. And what you can do, you don't necessarily have to have that burr. You can actually use other burrs for this as well. You just got to experiment a little bit. So let's put that in, and then you'll put a dot in the middle. And so what I'm doing there is just going really, really lightly over the pupil that's left, and just to see if that line that I've made is actually good and circular. We are really, really close up here, so you know there are defects in it, but those kind of won't be seen from a distance. And I'm just using, just to show you, you could use one of those T-shaped burrs to get in there and just sort of define that line if you wanted to, or you could go in with that straight away. I think I've used the inverted cone burr as well for eye pupils as well. Depends on the size. And then with the Dremel wheel point again, I'm going in with that. And there we go. We have one eye. Just got to do the other one the same. So that's what, like on the right there, that's what it kind of looks like when you have it all coloured up. And I'm just putting it in a little pattern around the skull cap, just to define it a little bit more, that it is actually maybe like material or something like that. It is going to be dyed blue, but I thought I would put a pattern in this time and just keep it really simple.
I tend to just go over with a bit of sandpaper, take off the rough bits. There's often like little bits of furries sticking out. You don't want to go too hard over the details, but just hard enough to take off sort of like the rough bits, I guess you'd say. Probably get down in those grooves, but just going like that. And honestly, I'm not spending that much time doing this because I don't like the real kind of smooth looking carvings. Kind of like a little bit rough around the edges and sort of like having little bits of moments of softness, maybe. Okay, so this is a Brewax wood dye. It is spirit based and it's for under polishers and waxes. So it is very, very strong. It's, you can see I've dropped bits of it there. But you can dilute it if you wanted to, but just don't spill it. It's just, if you spilt this on carpet or something, it'd be over. You know what I mean? So what I tend to do is I'll brush it on.
And just be very careful when you apply it because it tends to creep along the wood. So I tend to apply it far away from where I want it to go to and just let it sort of go up to it.
And so like the difference between a wood dye and a wood stain is a wood dye tends to be, well, more chemical based, I guess, but also it penetrates the wood, whereas the stain will tend to sit on top of the wood. Well, the pigments anyway. Pigments. Okay, so I like to sand it a little bit. Now, what you want to do is you want to sort of like use a piece of sandpaper and then throw that sandpaper out, but you also don't want to sort of create too much dust that drifts over here. So I just try and sand it so it's sort of a little bit rustic looking. Okay, so what we're using is a antique pine. I've used mahogany before. That gives quite a dark finish, but I quite like this. Because what we're doing is we'll put a dark wax over, so that'll kind of like bring out the highlights and all of that kind of stuff. So.
And we've almost finished putting on this wood dye. He looks rather jaundiced, I'd say. Okay, so we will put on the wood wax next. Okay, so we are going to put on the wood wax now, and I'm putting on some gloves. I found some gloves, so that's a good thing. And so this is Liberon Georgian Mahogany. And it's quite smelly, this stuff, but the smell dissipates over a couple of days and as it sort of like dries out. And what I like about it is it gets into all the creases and sort of makes the highlights, but you can also polish it up so it gives a kind of like a nice satin kind of shine at the end. So you sort of like, I apply it with a brush. It says to apply with thing, but you can sort of see there you work it into sort of like the patterns like that. And then when you wipe it off, the majority stays in the pattern or in the creases and sort of like in the eyeballs and all of that kind of stuff. Okay, so the next part is, well, he looks terrible there, doesn't he? So, but fear not, we will wipe off the majority and leave the sort of parts where it will stick out. So you can sort of see there, he's starting to look really good. Sort of like the creases sort of like hold the wax in. And if you've got a polisher, you can polish the wood as well. And I've just recently been using just Scotch-Brite and cut it into a circle and stick it onto a mandrel on a Dremel and just use that. That seems to sort of polish up the wood quite nicely actually. And so you can sort of see there that it's sort of like ending up a little bit more satiny kind of look to it. Brings out the blue a little bit more. And when you go on to the face, that's cool as well, because that will leave a nice kind of sheen. What I find though is it sometimes will pull the wax out the sort of like creases, so you've got to be careful not to sort of do that. Or you could use that sort of like, use that as a part of it and sort of manipulate some creases to have more wax in than others. It's just sort of like personal preference when you get to that point. And what you can also do is with the white of the eyes, you can go over that with a small burr. I'm using that Dremel wheel point burr there, really, really lightly going over it just to sort of bring out a little bit lighter shade to sort of contrast against the pupil. And if you don't like what you see, just put the wax back on and wipe it off again and give it another go. And I'm slowly surrounding my house with gargoyles and stuff like that. That's one that my father made up there. That one's out of Oamaru stone. And here is the one that we made today. And I hope you really enjoyed the video, and let me know if you'd like to see more kind of series like this. And I will see you in the next one. Okay, bye.